Hello children, in this video we are going to get the answers of all our questions which will remain unanswered in part 1 of the same story, The Great Stone Face. Before we begin with part 2, let us recall what all happened in part 1. So the story revolves around an old prophecy that someday a person having the likeness of the great stone face will come to the valley and is believed to be the kindest and the noblest person of his time. In the same valley, the main character of the story, Ernest, is growing by watching and learning from this great stone face, because he had always been told about this prophecy by his mother. And now he is desperately waiting for that prophecy to come true. But he got greatly disappointed twice. First, when the rumor was spread in the valley that a native of the same valley named Gather Gold, a person who became so rich, was now coming back to his valley to spend last few years of his life in the valley. People, they started believing that he had the likeness of the great stone face. Ernest again got disappointed when the same rumor spread about another native of the valley named Old Blood and Thunder. But that great stone face seemed to say him, Ernest, don't lose your hope. Let's see what happens in part 2 of the story, where the characters are the great stone face, which is personified in this story. Ernest, the main character, you already know well about him. A poet. Yes, there is a poet who is growing, okay, and he had such great thoughts in his poems that Ernest is fond of reading him. Ernest is still living in his valley. So Ernest, as you know already, that he was a very simple-hearted man. Ernest worked for the people, not only who were close to him, for everybody, okay? And though he was considered to be an ordinary man, yet he was humble and rich in thoughts. With the passage of time, Ernest became old. He had wise thoughts in his mind. He had become famous all over the world. Men came from distant places to see and to speak to him. This poet, I introduced the character, okay? So this poet had appeared on earth while Ernest had been growing old. The poet was a native of the same valley, but had stayed in distant cities for a long period. Ernest happened to read his songs. He thought the poet must bear likeness with the great stone face. He lifted his eyes to the mountain, and the face seemed to smile, but did not answer anything. The poet had heard of Ernest's character. One day he came to his door. Ernest was reading a book and glancing lovingly at the mountain from time to time. Ernest gave him shelter for the night. The great stone face looked kindly at the poet. The poet found Ernest wise, gentle, and kind. Ernest was also moved by the poet's mind and thought. It seemed the great stone face was bending forward to listen to the poet. Ernest examined the poet's features very carefully if he could find any resemblance with the great stone face. He hoped the poet was the person he had been waiting for. The poet declared himself unworthy for the likeness of the stone face. His life was different from his poems. The thoughts that he had put in his poem, his original life, was different from those. So Ernest used to speak to his neighbors every evening. As you know, everyone likes to listen to the people who are wise enough, who have great thoughts. So the same way, people in the valley, they were also just coming to listen to him. The poet also accompanied him one day. The poet listened to his talk. He felt that Ernest's life and character were a far nobler kind of poetry than his own poems. Just then, the poet saw the great stone face. He declared Ernest as the likeness of great stone face. Everybody in the valley agreed with him. But Ernest still hoped that someone wiser and better than himself would appear sometimes wearing a likeness to the great stone face. So children, this is how the great people react. So children, the moral of the story is the purpose of human life is to serve and to show compassion and the will to help others. We humans are human just because of humanity. Thank you, children.